Yeah.
Hello.
Where am I?
Guessed right. He's 50-50.
Been nice, ain't it?
Guessed right. He's 50-50.
Are you gonna do a handlebar?
Yep, working on it.
Oh.
different. There's different calculations for our state shared revenues, the state gas tax, cigarette tax, liquor tax, and so forth. Those are per capita typically, and this gives a little explanation about how those are calculated and estimated for our portions that come to the general fund, and the gas tax goes to the street fund. The remainder goes to the general fund. Spoiler alert, it's flat or declining generally. And then after that, there's a document that our insurance folks put together specific to us. I mean, a lot of it is generic to all, but it's there's some specifics about what our insurance rate increases, kind of how they're determined, what they're based on. So we have, and we'll talk more about budget assumptions about how we built that in, but that's kind of a backgrounder. There's a State of the Cities report. This is another League of Oregon Cities. It has some interesting statistics. Mayor Bell has used a few of these in setting the stage and some context conversations about that some of our budget challenges and our financial revenue issues are not necessarily unique to Coburg. Coburg, they are pretty well spread out around the state. And again, property taxes have a lot to play in that conversation. There was an article that this one is clearly, there's disclaimers. This is somewhat of an objective, but still opinion piece. But I thought it worth sharing. It's just background reference. I can't remember how he defines his, I think he calls himself a recovering elected official or something like that. He has a good term for it. But I thought it, again, really shows the broad implications of statewide, state revenue policies set local governments up to fail. That's the subline of the article, and I think it's useful reading to again kind of give some backdrop to how and why many cities are wrestling with the same stuff we'll be talking about. The final item is materials relating specifically to the public safety support fee that has been rightly so a hot topic in the last month or two here, and council recently at the very last meeting just a week ago, approved the establishment of that fee, and that's a general fund revenue stream. So we'll definitely talk about that when we get to the general fund review portion of the agenda. This is some background information of the revenue options subcommittee recommendations and staff reports that went to council, along with some FAQs that were a part of that. I think that's the whole packet. We'll be focusing on, I don't know how much time we'll, in reference we'll be doing to this third tab with all of the reference material. Most of our time will be spent talking about this very first tab with the financials, and then the backup, and it's annual specific backup is the second tab. So before I hop into the rest of the presentation and the discussion of the budget message and the general fund, any questions on the packet or anything else before I hop to the next thing?
I found it to be very complete and actually easy reading. Fairly.
I'll step then into this, and I hope one of the things, Mayor Bell and I, obviously we meet weekly, we talk about this stuff in depth, and I'm the budget officer, I presented, but it's the chief executive officer, chief administrative officer. It's a bit of a joint effort, and it for sure is also a collective effort with the whole team behind me to put this together. Because it takes into all of their expertise and knowing what their day-to-day operational needs are to fulfill to make sure our service levels are met, make sure our regulatory requirements are met, which are extensive, and that we keep making progress to the council goals. So, and on that note, maybe before I dive in, I think I wrote up a little item that I just wanted to make sure we cover, because budgets by design really commodify everything we do, right? They put it all into dollars, and that's what we end up talking about the rest of this, well, until council approves a budget in June. And that includes the people. We convert people to dollars and FTEs, full-time equivalents. And before, which is appropriate for this setting and what we need to do. But I just want to say that, this is an excellent team of 16 people, 15.1 FTE. So we have a few part-time people. So 16 individuals that carry out a wide array of services for this small community. It's just, to me, I just always reemphasize that all of what we do is being done by 15 people and some contract work, right? And we'll go through what stuff is contracted and how we do that. But it's an excellent team across all of the functioning programs and services that this budget highlights. And, while we're all FTEs, we're also not plug and play robots. We're all people. We've had, our team has had new family members. Our team has had, all kinds of changing family dynamics, stuff outside of work, and all the while, still, sharing their time and dedication to the city and the community. So, yes, we get paid. Yes, we're compensated. Yes, we'll talk about all that stuff, but it still comes down to services provided by these, the 15 core people. So I just wanted to make sure that was out there, and a quick shout out before we jump into all the minutia that is the money that drives it all. So it's money and people, right? And the money pays for the people. So
You're saying we are family.
there we go. Yeah, I could do. Yeah, the sister,
So we sang that.
sister sledge. Yeah. The Steelers and Pirates. We are family. Yeah. It is true. Yeah. I don't know. You could add dysfunctional. You could add all different things. We're family. We're family.
On the day.
Yeah, that's right. So with that, I'll jump in. Maybe. It was working. There we go. Going to sleep. We flipped it back and forth. We had to go. There we go. Okay. All right. So big picture. I took some of these slides are kind of redos from last year, but trying to kind of go from the top down into detail. So the big picture is this year, and Mayor and I talked about this, the good part I wanted, in a way it's boring, is because it's balanced and slowly improving. And slowly is not a bad thing. I think it's actually a good thing. I think these things take a lot of time, and we've talked about, the longer term objectives of and I hit my I shrunk it, but I put that slide, the arrow up every time, and council's probably getting super tired of seeing that, but it's just the reminder, almost the tattoo of what we're trying to accomplish. So and I'll skip to that one, is where the goal always is to be moving from financial survivability to sustainability and to resiliency. And that resiliency side might be a little aspirational, but I think it's not unreachable, but it's not easy given constraints outside of our control in the most part. But so the budget's balanced, slowly improving, and we'll go over each of the reasons or the hints in the numbers of why how it's improving. Staffing levels are stable. Last year that wasn't the case. We reduced 2.5 FTE, so that's a large percent. We go from 17.6 to 15.1. That was 1.5 FTE reduction in our police department and 1 FTE reduction in public works. So public works went from 6 to 5, police went from 5 to 3.5. And from my vantage point, I think again, a testament to the team, this team and their team mates, our macro team. I don't think we saw much drop off at all in service level, which was our goal. And, we shifted a lot of things around to try and make sure that our service levels were maintained. And I think we accomplished that. The general fund and the wastewater fund are improving, with revenues exceeding expenses on an operating basis. We can talk about more about the long range plan there, but that's part of that slowly. Those two are especially important in turning the dial. We had been having a number of years where we were eating into fund balance, where the expenses were exceeding on an operating basis, not just capital, where expenses were exceeding revenue. And obviously the math leads you to, you're digging into your savings account, which is your fund balance, and that keeps shrinking. And that had to be, we've talked about that for a number of years, that had to be turned around, and we are seeing the trend moving in the right direction there. And then I put a little arrow where we approximately are, I think, in that arrow on the movement from left to right. I think we're moving out of survivability and towards sustainability. I think we're right at that gray area, literally between the two boxes. And that's really indicative of the next slide. I use the term stability, and I think that's that gray area between survivability and sustainability. We're stable. We've stabilized everything, and I think we can now see a plan moving forward to move to sustainable. It takes some of the tough decisions that council just went through to reach that. And this recaps really some of the culmination of basically a year and a half worth of work. The committee was created, the revenue options subcommittee was created in September. It was talked about in July of 24 and then formally created in September, which was immediately after the FY25 budget. So that was, we're talking about the 27 budget. So, we're coming up on that was, it was noted in this room, 2 years ago, and then this transpired. And this was a timeline that we put together kind of early, was how to step through this 3-phase process. The budget message kind of has the 3 phases outlined in it. And this tries to show that we've stayed on target. We've stayed on track. Utility rates were the first to be looked at to stabilize water and wastewater and the TUF, which is one of the 3 pieces of our streets revenue streams. Then worked on after the utility rates. Phase 2 was general fund revenue options and recommendations. That led to the parks and open space fee, the $5 fee for parks and open space. Then turning the corner, a lot of time was spent at the subcommittee level, and then also at council from December until just last week, talking about options for longer range kind of structural general fund options. And that really, the analysis was a different category of a support fee, public safety support fee, or a local options levy. And both of those were discussed at last week's meeting and will continue to be discussed. Council did approve the public safety support fee, $20 fee. We'll talk about it more in here, but that is the linchpin for the general fund actually being defined as stable and moving towards sustainable. That's a significant kind of revenue course correction for us in the general fund. The discussion also at the council meeting, and we probably won't talk about it a lot here. It's really a council conversation, but hints for the future is the fact that the public safety support fee was approved and will be implemented in July. Council was very clear, staff, direction to staff to come back and dive right into the mechanics of a local option levy and what needs to be dealt with there, or the questions that need to be asked there to have a council determine whether or not that should go on the ballot at a future election. So we'll go through that over the summer starting next month. But so that green dot or the green square, that's not crossed off the list. It's just moved out on this flow chart beyond, because council chose to take the support fee rather than the levy at this time.
Just a clarification, can you clarify the public safety fee as being 1 year, ongoing, voted each year, etc.?
It's so that there's 2 pieces to it, and the one was an ordinance, which is the legal mechanism to have the legal authority to actually impose the fee. Then the resolution is what sets the fee amount. And so both were approved. The resolution, there was discussion of having it sunset. That did not come to pass. So the approved resolution embedded in it, similar to all the other fees that have the same structure, are reviewed can and will be reviewed each year for adjustment. They're not automatically increased. They don't automatically sunset. They are reviewed by council a year, and a resolution, is able to be modified at a council meeting. Ordinances require two readings, so 2 council meetings, a little higher level of public notice. So the future conversations with council will be about public safety support fee continuing at the same level, reduced level. Is it, would a ballot measure include language to sunset that fee and the local option levy replace? All of that stuff is really fresh off the meeting from last week. And staff direction was to come and start putting the information together to help council kind of work through all of that. And of course, it's also an extensive timeline to do that. When you work backwards, November is likely, we kind of hinted at it, but November is almost not possible. It's very, very unlikely, I'd say, at this point, that there's any way to get there in time for what is required to actually have a ballot measure submitted and have the appropriate legal review by our own legal staff and district attorney and submitted and everything for the elections office. So
More to come.
but much more to come. It's a highlighted item. Really, I envision it being, again, all summer long, and whether or not there's a specific task force that the council wants to assign. The revenue options subcommittee, they had a set of recommendations, and it's in your packet. The final recommendation was to recommend dissolution of that subcommittee because it had accomplished all 3 of the phases of its work. So that is no longer. So that opens the door to say, okay, all that work has been accomplished. Council made decisions. Now what? And we've just barely started on the now what is, hey, local option levy is the now what. Now let's start shaping that and figuring out what the options are, what the pros and cons are. And that'll, I assume and envision that to be happening, throughout the summer.
And am I correct that all of the fees we placed are up for annual review, not just the public safety fee, but every time we put a fee on, it's the same process?
Yep.
It's reviewed annually.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, they all, by design, all the fees that aren't true utility rates that associate with the utility. So the tree fee, the parks and open space fee, and now the public safety support fee, they have basically identical bones, right? They're the same, almost identical ordinance work, and same resolution template. So they function nearly identically.
Is that similar or different than the transportation utility fee?
Tough's a little bit different because it has a difference in residential versus non-residential customer classes for how the fee is charged, and how it was originally come up with the fee amount was a little bit different, but it's not massively different. But it isn't. It's not the same grouping. I count it more like a utility.
Did I hear you say diesel fee?
That was a leftover there. Which Councilor Lehman repeats often, which is good. The diesel, revenue option subcommittee really focused on general fund because we knew that was the number one challenge. A diesel tax, we have a gas tax, a local gas tax that goes into our street fund. A diesel tax would be the same. We would have to figure out the nexus for legitimate legal right and what we would use those revenues for. I think there is a nexus to be made that would stay in the street fund. That already has 3 different revenue streams. And so we'd really want to have a conversation about if that was put forward to add diesel onto the gas, what is that intending to accomplish? And I think there's more conversation to be had, but I think revenue options subcommittee, speaking for the 3 that were here or that are on that committee, really set that aside because of the more urgent dire need to address the general fund. But that's not a gone topic at all from a broad revenue perspective. All right. So moving on to this particular proposed budget. These are kind of the highlights of significant budget changes. Like I said, it's generally, boring is a negative term. I don't take it too negative. I take it as stable, right? It's a good thing that we're continuing on. We're maintaining all the programs, all the services, and the intention, all the service levels that we are operating under this current year, the FY26 year, that is a few months done. So the public safety support fee, the revenue, we've talked about $20 is 200,000. That's an approximation. We're going to be a month behind on the collections this year. So in this budget, and in all revenue versus expense, you estimate revenue low, you estimate expenses a little high. What's plugged into this budget is $150,000 in revenue. I think it's likely because it's $20 per unit per account. So there are accounts that are an 8-unit apartment building, so that's 20 times 8. So we didn't have an exact on that, but the general talking point equivalent, every dollar of any sort of a fee because of the number of utility accounts we have in units is approximately $10,000. So it's not an exact thing, and we will report on those when our monthly financials kind of touch on how those are trending. And we'll get that's another slice for our quarterly financial reports.
And the public safety support fee is also governed by the income assistance.
Yes, all 3 of the fees have the same language that makes them available for the low income assistance program, which is a proactive move that council decided to have a very I would say a robust discount package for that, for income qualifying at 150%, 125%, and 100% of median income. So it's an income qualifying thing, but all of the fees, not just the pure utility rates, would be eligible for those. If they're eligible, they all get that discount, up to a 45% discount on fees. So public safety support fee, that's a highlighted significant budget change. Absolutely. And it's been, like I said, almost 2 years in the making to really deal with revenue that the structural shortfall in the general fund is our revenues climb 3 to 5% a year. And there's a chart that has a little more breakdown of the revenues, but 3 to 5% revenue increase a year and expenses of 10 to 12% a year without capital, without new park stuff, that's just operating. So that gap was getting more and more severe. You accumulate that after a few years, you're eating into a fund balance to a point where you're not even legal. So we can't get to zero. We have to have a fund balance. We'll talk about that some more too. This was a general fund and a public safety real lifesaver and stabilizer for us. So we maintained the staffing levels. Like I said, that wasn't the case last year. I feel really good that we're able to maintain all of our staff. That's never a guarantee. You see that, I think City of Portland this morning, their shortfall was, primarily staffing. The cities in our region, that is a common thing, is shrinking services, open hours, and shrinking the staff that provide those services. That's really, for the most part, all that's able to be done. And we are at a point where it would be hard pressed to reduce staffing and not have not just a marginal service level impact, but a very programmatic, significant level change. And so I think we are at a very, very bare bones levels. And but the good part, again, going back to the big picture, the budget's balanced and slowly improving. I think we have the means to get where we need to go. So not a doom and gloom at all, compared even to last year. We just recently got additional loan funding to complete our water projects. We'll talk about that more in 2 weeks when we do the water fund. But that was a big get to add $1 million to our existing loan package with Business Oregon for additional water supply, bringing that online. That's a big investment for us in the future. Police department fleet replacement, that is a direct correlation, and we'll talk more about capital, but that is a direct correlation with that public safety support fee. It isn't just about, how quickly we can go about adding another officer. That is a long-term goal, but it's worthy of more conversation about what is the right service delivery model. But what is super clear and evidenced by this week, we have 2 vehicles that are out of service out of our top 4 vehicles. So temporarily, we're getting them fixed, but those are dollars out the door. Those are, 25,000 is a used purchase. That's not a new patrol vehicle at all. So we're getting them good vehicles that are already have miles on them. So we have to really be careful about our replacement schedules and not get too far behind where they cost us more money than they're even worth by the time they get to of us owning them over 4 years is probably a 6 to 7 year old vehicle. And those are, as you can imagine, driven rough, even when with good intentions. So I'm feeling really good. Chief Larson and I were looking at our fleet replacement, and I'll hit another slide that has the other year, but the goal is 25,000 every other year, which would get the fleet in a much more stable position, much more reliable position. And we are working on an MOU or an IGA with the county or with the large agencies. So when they do have surplus, they surplus every year. When they do, that we're automatically, us and another grouping of small police agencies, that we basically have some sort of a first right of refusal. So we can at least be guaranteed to have the ability to look through that inventory. And if we are in a cycle where we have funding for it and we need that replacement, that we're able to pull the trigger there. Because it's the 25,000, we don't want it to be just hoping and praying that somebody's surplusing vehicles and remembers to call us and let us know. They can also be in high demand. So we're looking to really embed ourselves with the larger agencies to ensure that is a reliable means of acquiring our fleet. Multi-year new neighborhood park funding, that is in, we'll talk about that in future slides as well, but this proposed year it's not in under capital. The next 2 years have 50 and 100,000 in capital to do phase 1 and phase 2. It's really conceptual right now about what will be in each phase, but in this proposed budget is 20,000 for kind of pre-capital, pre-development work for grading and getting that site. It's at Coburg Creek ready to then do the actual capital development on that property. I know that neighborhood is super anxious for that to get going, but we just 4 weeks ago closed out the Pavilion Park grant and got the full reimbursement. So that was I think 2021 discussion, 2022 grant, 2025 majority completed, 2026 all the dot the I's, cross the T's, get the final money. Those take a while. So I know that's a challenge for people who are anxious for a park, but those take a while. And also embedded, and it's also in the budget assumptions. There's a slide here that I'll step through too that has salary adjustments. For the last 3 cycles, we've used the CPI-U, which is a pretty objective criteria for our salary schedule to not lose track with what the workforce and those same skill sets and positions around the region are being paid. We're between 10 and 20% lower than the average agency. Those are hard. They're not ever exactly apples to apples comparisons, but they, from a compensation classification study, I think it was done in 22 here. We're behind, but we're not. I don't think dangerously behind, but keeping track, and making those adjustments with the CPI keeps us from falling to a position where we're really far behind. And then we have both recruitment and retention problems with our ever so dedicated family still needs to be fairly compensated. So we want to, that's a goal, is to keep everyone compensated. So the bottom blue boxes, the FY26, I had a significant budget changes, and the script on the bottom was, this addresses the now, but not the future. So the FY27, I think, this maintains the now and includes future investments. And I think that's kind of trying to, not oversell this as solved, but it's moving in the right direction. So here's the budget assumptions that go into the actual numbers in the financial tables and sheets. I mentioned the wage adjustment, 12% healthcare increase. That's a challenging number, and it's also a challenging benefit package, because what that gets you, who's in, who's in network, who's out. It's an ever-changing landscape that's not easy to navigate, even with the good program that we have. With those increases, the employees pay 5%, employer picks up 95. So it's a 95-5 split. I think that's been that way here for a long time, and that's a pretty normal split. 13%, that's actually, it was, I think the original was 10 to 15. We got that number in January. And then just a few weeks ago, we got the number a little more tightened up, that it's going to be about combined with general liability, property and vehicle, and our cyber insurance. It looks to be right at a 12 to 13% increase in all of our insurance. We're looking at adjusting some of that with changes in some of the deductibles on the auto, just to see if that's a big enough difference to just kind of comparison. We don't have a whole lot of claims, so we may be better off adjusting those up and see what the savings is. But so it's not a done deal, even with the change in some of those deductibles. It would be nominal decrease. So I think we're at least a 10%. So what's baked into the budget in there is 13%. We had recent appraisals on all of our physical properties, so those were updated. So we have really good, if and when we need to pull the trigger on the insurance that we have, we want to make sure that it actually gets us what we need. So while it's a bummer to always see these increases, it is much more than a necessary evil. It absolutely protects us. We have very vital things that need to be sure that they're covered so they can be replaced. We don't have the funds to replace those ourselves. That has to be covered under our policies. Yes.
We have PERS employees.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yep. PERS increases there.
So yeah, I had a little plug at the end, but I'll interject that now. As you recall from last year, PERS does a 2-year rates. They issue rates in a 2-year time frame. So this is year 2. So we don't have any. So that's why it's not on here. Last year it was significant driver of increase. It was a 22 to 25%, depending upon which category they're. I don't want to go down the PERS too far, but there are 3 different tiers, and then there's a difference between general and police and fire. So there's 6 kind of main tiers, and they give us a blended rate. So we are flat for year 2. The next year's budget assumptions, we will see a likely hefty increase in the PERS rate again. I doubt it's as hefty as last time, but that's hard to guess. So yeah, it's not, PERS is flat this year. So every other year we get to say, hey, great. No, nothing on the PERS side.
Basically, it comes out to about 12 or 13% per year if you take
Of the increase.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to split that. Exactly. Yeah. We take the hit in year 1, but yeah, it is if you take the 24-month. Exactly. We estimate 10% capital in all capital projects every year. We add 10% to it. That is, that's guess. Our projects are, until they go out for bid, even until we, are sitting in the bid opening, it's really hard to project. We got a really great bid on the Coleman project. We've received I would say a not so awesome bid, very competitive bid, but not what we wanted on the well 3 on Stallings. So the more kind of specialized the project is, probably the more those rise, because they have a higher level of engineering, a higher level of project management. There's a lot more that can happen in change orders. Street projects are generally our best ones for our estimating, that we have a good shot at knowing how those are going to lay out. Just as I think I mentioned it last year, but a street reconstruction is about $250,000 a block. just for, we'll talk about streets in 2 weeks at our next budget, but those are getting spendy. 10% utility rate increase, that's just a blended thing. You know, we spend about $50,000 a year with EPUD, primarily for our wastewater system. But we also have some Pacific Power, this building, and our streetlights around town. So we're about 60 to 70,000 a year, and spread out throughout the funds in utility rates. So those impact us, not huge, but they impact us. 10%, 7,000. 3%, 3.8% property tax revenue increase. 3% is the fairly guaranteed. The 0.8 is taking a stab at collections rates and new valuation coming on board. That's pretty consistent. I think a growing city that has a lot of growth going on, they might have their estimate, their assumptions at 4.2, 4.5. I think it's still relatively slow. Like a larger city with a lot of growth still has the valuation as a percent of their base valuation isn't huge. So it's rare to have more than a 5% estimate budget assumption on property tax. This one, the 25% was a doozy. That one came up just last week, our workers' comp insurance increase. That was an interesting conversation about why. It's a little to do with our prior claims over the 5-year period. We've only had 3. One was really small. The other 2 were linked, and they were, they weren't tiny. It wasn't tiny, but a lot of it also has to do with public safety statewide, presumptive cases, presumptive cancer in the firefighting industry, and presumptive PTSD in police. So those are, presumptive means that they have a high likelihood of winning in court, and they have one. So the data, insurance doesn't lose out for very long. They adjust, and the adjustment is both a general increase and a spot increase for if you have either of those 2 under your organization. It's an overall blended rate, but those are the components. So it's we paid 22,000, we're up to 35,000. So 25% is a big increase, and that's an estimate. But from a total dollars, it's not hundreds of thousands of new expense. But every single one of these categories have, that's why that conversation of the expenses rising faster than the revenue streams are the case. But those are the base, primary budget assumptions that go into our operations. So this one is the operating budget. I didn't have this one in last year, the last couple of years, but I thought it'd be worth doing more, kind of optics, but it's real. We have a budget of 12.5 million or so. What I think is important is the actual operating revenue and operating expense. We spend about $6.5 million a year. The unappropriated ending fund balance, the reason we have a $12 million budget is there's a number of things that are in our fund balances in each of the 4 funds. EFB is ending fund balance. We need that for cash flow. We need that for our debt service obligations. We are required by our debt covenants to have a certain amount of fund balance in reserve. We have restricted systems development charges that we have to carry forward from year to year because we have to wait and spend those on eligible projects. They're not, they're restricted to certain state ORS requirements. And then we sometimes have prior year capital project funds that are front loaded. We get them in a year, and it takes us a year or 2 to spend down. So sometimes those are in the unappropriated ending fund balance. So I think it's just useful to know that the total budget, we don't spend $12.5 million every year. We spend between 6 and 7 depending. And of course the operating expenditures is the maximum appropriation level. We probably spend 90 to 95% overall of what is appropriated in a kind of.
What's the third number on the screen? It says difference. I can't see it from here.
Yeah, that is just the difference between operating revenue and operating expense. So in parentheses, it's A little over 800, a little over 800,000.
Okay,
And those are planned project expenses. This year, that happens to primarily be the Coleman project. We were front-loaded, weirdly enough, the funds, because there was a fund exchange between federal dollars and county. So that money was distributed as early, and we're spending, so we're spending a prior year nest egg of those funds. Normally, you'd want and expect, unless there's good reasons for it, where you're on purpose spending down fund balance, which we'll get into with our other three funds next meeting. There are conditions where we are on purpose spending down fund balance more than what we bring in annually. But generally, you want to look at your day-to-day operations should have, your revenue should be covering your expense. And if not, you should have a strategy and know why. Because it doesn't mean it's a problem. You just should know why.
So the operating revenue, operating expenditures, and the difference, those three numbers adds up to the total budget number?
No, the operating expenditures and the appropriated ending fund balance add up to the total budget. So the three numbers in the middle, I tried to put some spaces. I could have put a box around it. Maybe the total budget, 12.6, then kind of that operating operating revenue expense, and kind of the analysis that there is a difference. And then what is in this budget that is not appropriated. So we're, once it's all finished and council adopted, we are not approved, of staff and myself for signature approval. We are not approved to spend almost $6 million of that 12. Is not appropriated, meaning it's not legally assigned by budget committee and the council to spend.
So the operating revenue and the unappropriate ending fund balances equals the 12,676?
Yep. Should. Operating, yep.
Does it?
Operating expense and unappropriated ending fund balance should equal total budget. And that's on the citywide. We can go through that. It might show itself differently. The intention of the slide was to point out that we have an almost $6 million that, quote unquote, sits for very good legal and operational reasons. We churn through about $6 to $6.5 million a year, which is, I think, when we're talking in the community, what we accomplish and what you see day to day, week to week, month to month is not done with $12 million. It's done with $6 million. So it kind of right sizes that, I think, in the conversation.
I just added the operating revenue and the unappropriated ending fund balance, came up with a different number than the total budget.
It's the expenditures spent. Yeah, the operating expenditures.
Okay, it's the operating expenditures and the, okay.
And that is shown on pages 21, 22. Those are the citywide sheets in the a little more detailed. So when we start diving in, this will kind of transition us to the general fund specifically. Well, before I get there, the budget message, like I've done in the several years, there's the budget overview. The budget message talks about kind of macro stuff, and then the budget overview starts on page 9. Some general stuff about what is a budget, how it's used, and then I go through the each major fund, and in each of those funds, there's a little paragraph or two that give you a sense of what are the operational responsibilities, the major revenue streams, the major expenditures, and then an assessment of the financial stability and sustainability of each of the funds. So that, definitely give it a read. I know you just got them yesterday. Give those a read. We'll dive in more on the general fund tonight, but that may generate some questions either between meetings or definitely that we can address at the next meeting if there's any questions on kind of how I did that broad analysis. But when I do that analysis, every fund has these 6 elements, and each fund is kind of its own unique fingerprint about what ratio of each of these things are in each fund, but they all carry an ending fund balance. The Finance Audit Committee we're working on, we've kind of had some scheduling stuff, and I just haven't got there yet. We are at the 5-yard line probably of having fund balance targets embedded in policy that'll go to council. So every fund should have an ending fund balance target that we never go below. So we would, it's basically, the policy is a directive to staff to never put a budget together and present that is below those fund balance target thresholds. So we don't have that in place. I think we're in pretty good shape, but that is coming in the next couple of months. So each of the funds have an ending fund balance, and those fund balances are different for different reasons. They all have capital infrastructure needs, some more than others. The water and wastewater clearly have a lot more capital intensive than especially the general fund. General fund, typically it's this building and parks. Those are, and then some vehicle needs, but most of our capital, the big dollar stuff, is not in the general fund, but it's heavy in the water and wastewater. So we obviously have personnel service costs, and we'll go in a little more of the staffing allocation, I think, next slide. And then each fund has a different level of staffing. All of them, of course, it costs us dearly to have our specialized team in each of these programs and fund areas. And then we also have to always have an analysis on how many people we absolutely need in order to get the regulatory job done, as well as the service level job done. They all have materials and services. The water fund has chlorine, it has pump replacements, it has electricity, it has, training, certification, consulting, monitoring, lab expenses. Every fund has materials and services. General fund has a lot of technology expense and software subscriptions, because you don't buy software anymore. You just rent it. So every fund, again, has different kind of ratio of how much in the materials and services. And then every fund has debt service. And again, that sheet at the very back gives you an idea of how much debt, and so it's in the financial sheets as well, how much annual debt service each of the funds carry. So those are the real components to it. And then here's the breakdown for us specifically, this year's staffing level allocation. It's also in the budget message in the overview. We allocate a bunch to the different funds when we all do work across the funds with a few exceptions. You see there are,
Adam, is there a page we can look at? I cannot read that from here.
Sure. That.
I also cannot see the TV. Perhaps
You
it
want
would
to
be.
closer? Thank you. I don't think I have the exact same chart in, where do I? I have it in here. I just need to find it.
Today.
41.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
It's making us
Page 41.
Yeah. We'll see how it looks for 41.
Page 41 has this in a little bit larger close up for you. So out of our 15.1 people, 7.3 are in the general fund. So, that's pushing half of our total. And that's pretty typical. That the general fund is primarily services. And to provide services, you need people. And you can see the allocation. Of course, all of the police department is in the general fund. The municipal court is in the general fund. The majority of our planning and building, it's called community development here, is in the general fund. We have the luxury of having Megan as our planning director in community development. She's pretty instrumental in our transportation planning and also in some of our grant work with both ODOT and the MPO. So there's a 0.1 that recognizes the work that she does in the street fund, primarily, like I say, with getting us access to funding and then long range transportation planning that mapping out how our streets go into the future. We've pretty successfully for, I think, 3 years now, Brian and I worked on kind of having a a specialty for each of our public works staff to say they have a focus in an area. That's helped us for training, that's helped us for certification, really having them know that while they are a jack of all trades, they do stuff across the board. They all have a focus area, water, wastewater, streets, and parks. And the streets and parks you can see is kind of a 0.4. And the reason it's all four is they all also do duty. We have someone on call all the time, and we pay 1/8, 1 hour for every 8 hours to have one person rotating evenings and weekends. They have a monthly schedule. They all share and end up covering that. So there is nobody that is exclusive to one fund or one function because of that, because they end up being a participant in covering the entirety of our on-call needs. And they generally are able to back each other up. Obviously, people are gone, sick, vacation, family stuff. So we do have to have cross-training and all that. But we have been, I think, pretty successful in establishing everyone being allocated and having a primary function. And then us in administration, we are allocated out to all of the funds, with the majority still being in the general fund. But we do, because we do the utility billing, we do all the receivable work, all the budget work, all the audit work, all of the paying those folks, everything associated with administrative capacity for those other businesses are handled by our administration team. Well, not with an interface with our department heads, of course, in each of those. So that gives you a sense of where the people are, and then this translates to the dollars in the personnel cost allocations. So jumping into revenues, this is I guess this flips us back to the budget message on page. For being a little closer, should have 14. Thank you. This is just a relatively trying to be really intuitive to show that property taxes make up a little over half of our revenue in our general fund. Franchises are the orange slice. Those grow. They grow very slowly as well. They're, I guess, the bad and good of franchises are when natural gas and electric rates go up, our franchise revenue goes up. Everybody pays, they're based on a percentage of gross revenue for the activity that occurs inside the city limits. So franchises are an agreement in exchange for using the city's public rights of way to serve the utilities to all the residents and businesses. So they're between 5% and 7%. Each agreement has some differences, but so it grows, and it grows based on if it's 110 for 8 weeks this summer, the franchise revenue for EPUD and Pacific Power goes up. But it's not substantial. It's pretty measured. And like I said before, property taxes, 56%, that is, I think there's misnomer in most communities I've been in where the assumption is property taxes take care of the general fund. This shows it takes care of a little over half. And typically that's a declining amount. So we're going to expect to get about $30,000 to $35,000 more in property taxes this year than last. That's the rate at which it increases. 3.5%. We're weirdly good math. We're about $1 million a year, so 3.5% is 35,000. And then the rest of those slices get small really quick. That's includes our municipal court fines, which heavily relate to the activity of our police department for traffic and other misdemeanors and activity by that group of customers. And we have a revenue contract there that is, it's quote unquote only 3%, but it's an important piece. Is the Harrisburg service contract that we have to provide some augmented traffic and code enforcement services there that they are pretty ecstatic to have that augments their sheriff's office contract. Development fees are one that we will get to the next slide, that those change fairly substantially based on obviously growth and development in the community. Those have been flat since the completion of the last subdivision. We've had a lot of activity, tire kicking, small stuff. There's some large items out there looming, but it's hard to gauge. We can have a pre-app, which is the first step in the land use process, but it's really hard to gauge when they're going to win, or if and when they're going to actually pull the trigger. There's so many other factors beyond us. So we try to crystal ball that, but right now those are fairly they're shrinking compared to 2 years ago. So here's the chart. This is also this is on page 15. No, general fund revenues go backwards. This is on 13. So this just shows with the 3-year or 4-year trend. The last 2 years are actuals and end of year estimate for the current year that we're in, and then the proposed what we are estimating revenues for the next year. And probably the item of note is that I did this as grant adjusted, the bottom line, because we had Pavilion Park in there that kind of made the numbers look weird. So if you take that out and just say the general fund as a normal operating fund without that one-time thing, it clearly is trending up, and that's in large part due to the public safety support fee and year 2 full year of the park and open space fee. So that's both of those are under the charges for services line, third from the bottom. And you see basically from 90,000 to almost 310. That's one of the few areas where we actually, with a lot of hand wringing and tough decisions from council, we have some ability to change the revenue pattern. We don't have much in the way of taxes, assessment, property tax. The other lever is what we talked about is local option levy. That's a 5-year limited levy. Brings in compression and other things that we'll be talking about over the summer, but that can augment property taxes to some degree. The rest of these are relatively they're pretty much out of our control, and they're also mostly under 10% each individual piece of the overall revenue pie. But the good side is that's significant to move from 1.8 to just over 2. It allows us to stabilize and hopefully get towards sustainability. So this is a departmental breakdown that kind of gives you a relative sense of expenses by department. You can see, and then also kind of their relative share of the fund. The parks is the outlier there. You can see in FY25 that was Pavilion Park was the largest expense, but it carried over into finishing out in FY26, our current year. The number for FY27 is a little more normalized, but those are the trends. They aren't changed substantially, but as we move certain functions around a little bit as we can from a cost allocation basis, those can take some of the edge off there. But the budget assumptions that we talked about 4 or 5 slides ago drives those expenses for the most part. And then the smaller one to the right is also shown. It's on page 14. That's just personnel only. So the total expense, and then there's personnel only, which again is just necessary to meet the service level expectations that we have. So capital for general fund, took a stab at this current year, and you'll see that there's a capital line for multiple departments that are in the general fund. So I summarized these. So the chart, these are straight out of the financials on general fund pages 23 and 24. I think the 23 went away. It got covered up, but 23 and 24 is the summary of the general fund. So on the capital side, we have budgeted a police department fleet replacement. The goal of continuing, to keep all the tool set we need for our team to keep doing what they do. 5,000 for some pre-development work or pre-project work for property survey and topography survey for needed ADA improvements for parking and the front entrance. We need to get that started, and this gets all the survey work done, allows us to know really what we're in for in terms of the next step, which I have in the next two, and I'll get to them by year. And then the last one proposed for 27 is we did less scheduled replacement on technology than we had scheduled for the current year we're in. We did not hit those targets, so we're catching up a little bit there with not a huge amount, but the server is right at end of life, so it may not end up being a capital purchase. We may be able to navigate that to a virtual server and just be cloud completely. It takes some other operational changes, but we also have a number of desktop and tablet replacements, and so those kind of just barely meet the capital thresholds. So they're, as a group, we put them in capital. So FY 28 and 29 projected, we have the next step in the City Hall project that's actually engineering design. So then we know what the actual project entails, and there's still more discussion to be had about this building and ensuring that when we make investments, they're the right investments and they have the right useful life or life cycle. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have capital for the new neighborhood park for at least a phase one. So whatever we don't get done in the this year of pre-development site work, we'll roll right into the next year with at least phase one. And those are really conceptual. We're not even really at a 30% concept plan for the park yet. Park and Tree Committee has done some really good initial work on some brainstorming and for attributes and major elements. And then we're going to do some community engagement work this summer, and then come back around to Park and Tree and get it to a at least a 60% designed project, and then we'll have a better sense of our phasing and our costs. But these are what we're projecting out for the next 2 years, 50 and then 100. So 29 is the actual construction for the work in for City Hall. And then phase two of the neighborhood park, and then another fleet replacement, so that every other year, again, when you annualize it, the goal is 12 to 15,000 a year. We don't currently have an equipment fund or any sort of a sinking fund, so we do it on a capital, every other or whatever the timeline needs to be. We're still kind of toying with, do we have enough scale and volume to bother with the accounting functions of having an actual sinking fund and an equipment fund? Probably not, but more to come on that. So it doesn't quite have a fully levelized budget like an equipment fund would have. But every other year is what the goal really is. And then we'll be coming back with some other equipment needs that are more materials and services for PD. The cost of outfitting, properly outfitting the team, just keeps going up with technology and the need and the requirement from a legal liability perspective to have those things. They're not optional, nice tools to have. They're, for the most part, it is a required set. Tasers, guns, body cam, and all of those have, cloud services with them. Those aren't just hardware purchases, and the hardware purchases, just like laptops, in 5 years, all of those are gone. And you start over radios. We don't have very much control at all over when the region says, hey, we're moving to these, you have to have this. Within 12 months, we have to have them. And then we have to make decisions, Chief and I, about how far do we roll all those tools down to, including the reserve officers versus our active officers. So we're developing a kind of a master plan of our tool sets, both hardware and software and software as a service, cloud-based stuff. Progress, definitely in that, but those show up more as materials and services. The primary thing from the PD, from a tool set that's capital, is the equipment, is the vehicles. That is the run through of the general fund. I'd love to answer. This is the agenda for next 2 weeks from tonight. We have some state revenue sharing, actual kind of, it's a weird two-step process the state requires, is to verify that we're eligible, that we're an eligible community for it, and that we want it. Not sure why there's somebody would say no thanks, but it's a two-step process. So then we can have some general fund follow-up. If there's any additional stuff that I can't answer or our team can't answer tonight, we can put together. I think last year we did a little FAQ document that we handed out at meeting 2 based on comments or questions that came up in the first meeting. So we'll have that little conversation. Then we'll go over the fund overviews for streets, water, and wastewater. And then it's really the discussion again about the whole thing, the budget approval. And then Linda and I talked about, and we didn't do a good job of this. I didn't do a good job last year. We were talking about a survey. Survey never happened. I think we're going to try and do, if we're not totally wiped out at the end of Tuesday night, to have just a process recap, what worked well, what didn't satisfy your expectations. And we'll still try and follow up with the survey, because some people want to talk about that as a group. Some people still would rather, we'll do it both ways. But that's the recap for 2 weeks from now. So there's a chance to absorb all this and not have to ask all the questions. The general fund, of course, isn't a closed conversation after tonight. We can talk about it more. And that one is the most, it's got the most pieces, parts to it. It's probably the one that people see the most. The others are, I think, pretty straightforward. Brian and I, have really tried to hone in and map out what are the operations, the operational needs, and the capital needs obviously match up really well with the capital improvements plan that you have in your packet here. And those are already council approved. So those are a bit plug and play. And generally want to talk about the trends. Are each of those funds trending correctly? How and why are we applying rate increases in those 3 areas? And really just a forward looking about, what things we need to worry about from threats to those revenue streams, or really large looming regulatory issues on the expense side for each of those. That's where we'll see most of that kind of conversation is with those 3 funds, not with the general fund. So it's kind of the general fund, and those other 3 are kind of different. That's why we try to split them up that way for tonight and in 2 weeks. So with that, I could go back and hit on any slide. I could hit on any particular format question or content question in here, or we can, email stuff in and make sure that we have a good FAQ or a Q&A response document to kick off that conversation next meeting.
So you might add, though, we should at some point, if we're going to communicate outside of the meeting, there are some guidelines / rules.
Yeah, don't do it.
That. So,
Through Sammy and I.
Okay,
Through Sammy and I. Sammy should be copied in so she can make sure the permanent, public record retention for that, and then more of that, the operational answers I'll assemble. So between the 2 of us, that'll get it accomplished. Yeah, it's so easy to have a one-on-one turn into a serial meeting, and those are no messing around. We talked about that at council just last week. There are some serious implications when people even accidentally cross those lines. So the best bet is questions, just email them to Sammy and I both.
So just clarification on the unappropriated ending fund balance, is that a lump sum separate from each of the fund accounts?
No.
Okay, it's embedded in each fund.
Right. So the first display has them by citywide. So pages 21 and 22, that's a citywide display of all of our stuff. And we do that in our monthly financials as well. I don't look at that too much. It's interesting, but it's so consolidated that it's not useful to me. Our 4 funds are so very different that I end up in the financials, I kind of skip the citywide stuff and I look at each fund, and each fund has its own fund balances that will add up to that total.
So that's an unappropriated ending fund balance that you basically don't touch during the year.
Right.
And how is that similar or different with the contingency fund?
Contingency is appropriated and used. There are rules about how we disclose it to council when we need to use it. So
each fund has a contingency?
yes,
Line item as well.
correct.
It's not added to the unappropriated ending fund
Right.
balance.
Correct.
So you have both unappropriated amount and then you have a contingency fund that you're not anticipating to expend.
Right. It's not a fund. There's contingency amounts in each of the funds. Yeah, it's not its own fund. So
Are those at approximate 10% levels or?
50,000 for the general fund, 200,000 for the 3, I believe they're listed. So the general is 50. No, contingency in streets is 50, pardon me, and then 200 in each of the larger funds. And the reason for 200 in each of those is those can easily, well, we had one in right when the fiscal year started this year. It ended up, Brian was able to contain it from being a total financial catastrophe. But the first 2 weeks of the fiscal year, we had $20,000 to $25,000 water line break. So in water and wastewater, contingency amounts need to be larger because things come out of nowhere that are bigger dollars. The general fund and streets, typically we would not be experiencing stuff that would require that much of contingency. So 50 in each of those funds that are less expensive and less dire, and 200 in each of the larger funds. But if we don't spend them, they're kind of a rollover, right?
And I believe those were set by council.
Yeah, they were there when I got here. There were some, and I think that what we haven't done is put that into policy about that those are plugged.
They roll over to be included in the ending fund balance then?
Yeah, they basically get reappropriated. If they don't get used, they're reestablished as contingency for the next year. And then if we do budget transfers at the end of each year, that's part of the resolution that shows if we are asking that where are we taking it from, we'd be listing that it's from contingency by fund.
What other questions do we have tonight?
Kind of have a general question for receiving the information. I emailed you,
Yeah.
but I can ask you.
Yeah.
Is it possible to receive this information in Excel format? Specifically, it's pages 21, in that area through 37, I believe. They have a lot of the estimates and proposed, and I just feel like it would be better for an understanding if you're able to see it in an Excel spreadsheet, to be able to see the differences and information that's not necessarily provided but can be easily done through Excel.
Yeah, like I said in the email, it's not typical because those are then edited and changed around, and and they start with formulas. All of that comes out of our general ledger. I guess I would probably answer that. I would prefer that it isn't. But if there is a need in fulfilling the committee's charge, that's the ultimate, criteria. I would prefer that be a motion of the committee to put it out there that way. And as I said, I could go through the spreadsheet and we could remove because they're all linked formulas. So if I just send it, they'll break. So I have to, take it out to where it's just the data, doesn't have any formula behind it. So you have the number, but you don't know how it was arrived at. You have the line item detail behind it. So I suppose it's really a more of a policy question about, furthering the group's charge, if that, and again, the 3 places that I've done municipal budgeting, that hasn't been the case. The larger cities have an interactive budget from a technology standpoint. So you set up, and I did this 2 cities ago. That was one of my projects. It was an interactive proposed, which was different than what was provided to you know, because we still have record retention, what version and how we're keeping track of things. That's a more standard way to do it rather than having the actual spreadsheets go out the door. Those are expensive. We likely won't be in an interactive budget scenario for a number of years. And they're cool. They're getting a little bit cheaper, but you know, Eugene has it, and you know, in Ashland, where I was a couple of places ago, we did have an interactive budget where you could then actually step budget committee and the public through, and they could actually put in, if I did this, what would it do? You know, and because that's another part of this is you change one number, it's going to change 3 other numbers. So that's the worry, I guess, is that it's not
The feeling of the
workable.
group, I
Well,
guess. in
I
terms
would
of-
also say that in the past, when folks have really wanted, and I'm assuming you didn't want to look at every line item, but there might be some areas you were interested in, have come in and met with a staff member to review some areas more specifically. So I don't know if that's still an option.
Absolutely. Yeah, that works always. I could talk for hours and hours, as you can tell, on this topic. So, so yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah,
Your
being a
thoughts?
numbers person too, I could see it would be helpful for someone like me to have a pasted values Excel, or it's just the hard coded numbers. Only because then I don't have to type them in Excel myself. And then I can do things like see that quickly calculate the difference year over year and the percentage difference and things like that. So that's probably what
That's,
you
yeah,
were
that's
kind
kind
of
of what I
thinking
was.
too. But I get it if, if
Well,
you
the-
kind of don't like to do that, I understand why too. So.
I suppose from a you know, a public meetings and a deliberation and a public record standpoint, I guess the challenge would be, you know, making decisions and motions based on some of those kind of calculations that the entire group doesn't have. So typically that's why it funnels through staff, not to be a gatekeeper, but to ensure that what comes out, you know, matches up with all of those other trailing things that might go into one particular number, and where else it shows up. So I think I think it just is ripe for problems. I get it. You know, doing some of those things so you can actually get some, you know, your choice rather than my choice of what I highlighted. But what I probably prefer is, yeah, just saying, what stuff do you want to see comparisons of? What are you looking for trending that we didn't talk about here? And we can produce those. You know, that's probably the more typical way those are done. And it isn't because I don't trust that people don't know how to do math or do Excel. It's just really keeping it consistent amongst the group, and also having it, once it's in the record, you know, if it was accidentally not right for whatever reason, we have to go kind of correct that, or because it's part of the public record. So it's challenging, but it's not the end of the world. Like you say, I'd strip out the values. You don't get to see, you know, what went into that number, which I think creates problems. Not for the interactive budget kind of thing, the integrity of that stays. So when you change it, it changes it in all the other places that number might live. And of course it's not anything part of a public record, but there's nothing illegal about doing it. There's nothing prohibits it from being done. So it could be shared. I just think it lends itself to creating confusion if people are using that. Even just that, like the conversation of which number goes into the ending fund balance and how do you find that and where does it go? If people are coming up with different things, we're bringing it back to a meeting and we're kind of live proofing it and saying, okay, how'd you come up with that? So let me do that real quick to make sure I agree with that number. That's some of the problems it creates. But I get what what both of your are great examples. So again, I prefer we do the work and shoot it back to you.
Claire, what is your?
One comment I would make is not being an Excel spreadsheet brain. If we do it, it would be nice to have it in addition to these reports, because these feel very understandable for me being not an accountant. I wouldn't want to see these replaced with the spreadsheet.
We can't, I mean, these are the spreadsheets, right? They're spreadsheets that were just put into, non-usable PDFs, as you said in the email. So these are spreadsheets. It's not
They're
any,
portions of the spreadsheets is what you're saying, is that?
yeah, these are tabs that all have other things behind it that, as Kathy said, it's pretty easy to say, okay, just take the values, make a separate file, send it out. It misses the stuff behind it. Because obviously some of the stuff behind it legally we don't share. That's HR stuff. That's people's health benefits. That's stuff that doesn't go out the door. But yes, it can be done. There is nothing, I think, legally prohibiting it. It just makes record retention and clarifying that we're all working on the same set of numbers when decisions or motions are made. But that's also me always thinking of the worst case scenario, right? That it could go just fine and not have those snags.
But just also seems like it goes beyond the scope of what a function as the budget committee, because we approve a total dollar amount. We're not here to look at material services levels or amounts, which is what I think you would do if you delve into the spreadsheets and did what ifs. This number was lower, this number was higher, this was so.
Yeah, I think that's a good
Well,
point.
Question might be to the two of you, were you talking about having everything spreadsheet on all of the numbers for everything, or was there
I guess-
areas of interest that you really want to see something?
I guess the whole reason why I would have brought it up is the reason that you had brought forth saying, oh, if there's an area of interest. And so for me, having more of the Excel brain, I would be able to do something of seeing a year over difference. And then that would be able to be like, oh, this is what's, popping up. And I wouldn't be able to know that unless I saw the difference year over year. So
Double check it.
it's essentially, yeah. And I mean, I thought that's what we were here for, but I don't know. Perhaps I'm incorrect on that.
We don't generally get into the minutia of each line or anything. Let's
Right,
put
but
it
like the
that way.
finals or.
One thing I will say is that's been helpful, but it's way higher than you're looking, is the 5-year projection so that we can see, are we gonna be okay? Because, our focus right now is this 1 year, but we like to look out for the 5-year projection. I think you were going to put that in for next time.
My understanding, or at least what I was, maybe I wishful thinking understanding, with the 3-year projection. So we have 3 out years. So we have, we have actuals from the prior year. We have what we think we're going to end this current year. We have the proposed next year, and then 3 more. I think past 3 more gets completely guessing.
Not realistic.
Yeah,
in some ways.
both on capital, on dollars, on rates, on economy, on growth and development. And I think that was, as I recall, I think that was a conversation, my preference. We can run that out 2 more. Not sure how we'll work it from the formatting, but we can run that out and run some general percentages. I think that gets really hard.
Just gives us an overall picture of the trend and right, are we looking, just like we ask for the revenue subcommittee because we could see ahead that we were going to have problems. And so that's a much bigger level than I know you're thinking, but I think the real question here is what level are we wanting to see? And it may vary among all of us, frankly, which is why I had mentioned the option to go and meet with someone on the staff is another thing rather than have a lot of spreadsheets for all of us.
I think really that it's just the information is being provided to us in here, and obviously we don't have time to look through all of it and try to make sense of all these numbers that are right in front of us. So I mean, we don't need the detail for absolutely everything, but if we could at least get a workbook that has these numbers in there, then we could try to make sense of them or look at some trends or other things, not necessarily try to plug and play and switch up formulas and do anything crazy, but just to look at the data that's already provided here so that, like you said, we don't have to type it back in ourselves or try to recreate it, so that we can understand it the way that our brains comprehend it.
I just think it needs to be, I'm fine. We'll do whatever the group, I think it's probably a motion and vote kind of thing. To make sure that we're doing it because we're kind of setting up process procedures.
Right, we seem a
So-
little mixed, but I also, because we have had, and I appreciate the folks that are really into the Excel pieces, because they have taken a look at some areas that have been hot topics and have been able to come back and, share some things with the rest of us too. So the question is, how do we want to do that, I think? So before I entertain a motion, if we need one,
From the staff perspective, the goal is to have, just like we do a council every 2 weeks or every month, is to provide, the information to make, in this case, recommendation, not decision, but recommendations and decisions. So if that is kind of universally, agreed upon as a beneficial tool to do that, sure, we'll do it. I think there's cautionary to how that is put back into the process in meeting 2. That's probably the only thing. And my preference, and maybe it's control freak style, is to tell me what you want and I provide it. That's my job. So I get it though, from an analysis and saying, hey, I don't know what I want you to provide me until I look at it a little bit. So maybe it's chicken and egg thing. So maybe we put it out there. And it's still an ask on my end to say, okay, do whatever you want to do from comps and trending and all that. But don't bring that back and make it part of your motions and stuff. Feed it to us, and then we can make sure that it's disseminated back out in a way that is a useful group tool for a decision. That's probably my number one thing, is not having it mess up that part.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna kind of recap. I think for me, what I pictured as soon as Angela said that was just literally just this page instead of being in PDF. Hard coded numbers.
Which one
in
is that?
Excel, because those of us, just like these,
page
page 21.
Yeah, Angela listed out, and I agree. These are the meat of them,
But
right?
if you, yeah, but just
21 to.
if you just put it in Excel, those of us that know how to use Excel, I'm not picturing us bringing back the page that we worked on and saying, now here's what we're going to do. I'm envisioning sitting at my computer at home with it and just doing a couple formulas based off the numbers that are already there. But also the other idea that you brought up was, well, tell me what you want. So like one of the first things I would do would be to put a variance maybe at the bottom and show the change in amount year over year, and then what the percentage changes year over year, just at the, between the, but here again, that might get a little busy and messy to have to do that for the whole group, when I can just do that at home in the privacy of my home, and I'm not going to be doing anything with it other than just using it to understand the trends. And like you were saying,
we've done things differently over time, and there have been times that we've done the variance part. And you're right, sometimes it gets to be a lot. So I think what we've gone to, and you probably covered some of that, is highlighting where the major changes are. But then I can see that you guys might want to then go to the Excel and go, okay, I see then where those are reflected. So we have had variances before. It does draw your eye to the area that's changed.
Yeah. Again, I'm not wanting to oppose any of this. I think the key would be, when you talk about year over year, for a couple of things. First off, this is an accepted, format. It's a similar format that we use, that actually we have documents that have to go to the state and all of that stuff. And that stuff has to get stripped back out. So, those are fine analysis. Actually, there is a lot more on this spreadsheet than this. This is already, those are there with some of those, cross-checking, and, obviously a working spreadsheets come from our general ledger. We put them in a format that allows us to summarize them this way. So there's a whole lot of stuff. And just this by itself, this set is easy. They're all on a tab. Making that happen is easy, right? The key, I guess, is you can do all that trend. You can say, then the question is, why is the trend the way it is? And then that's back to Linda's point is, that's the context part that takes either a discussion here or a one-on-one to say, well, that's because of this. That's because we changed our cost allocation policy, and it used to be direct charge. Now it's indirect charge, so I guess I've got a fair number of years doing it, and I question sometimes the big picture value in that. I don't at all want to not have the exercise and have you come to that conclusion, or it unearths the nugget, and that's fine too. If you want spreadsheets, it's easy to tomorrow morning, clean it out and send it. It's not a huge deal.
For those just those pages.
Yeah.
Repeat again, was it 21 through what?
Yeah, it's all of the actual financial statement stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not, if you, from your experience, if you feel uneasy about it, I'm okay with not doing it too.
I want
It's
everybody to
fine.
feel, like they understand it
Yeah.
and track it as well. So I don't want to poo-poo it at all or wet blanket it. So
Well, I think
I'm okay.
what I'm hearing is we can have that sent out. Or the other option would be for you guys to individually go with the staff, which does take
Both.
your time though,
Yeah, both
away
is an
from
option.
home. So what would your preference be to just have those sent out?
I think it should deserve a motion.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion.
May I ask a question? You said it's easy, but I'm looking at time and resources. How much time are we talking to do this?
10 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, it's a spreadsheet. They're spreadsheets. So it's
Be involved in what you do with the
That's
information.
absolutely, that's really it, is the response to the analysis, right? To the individual analysis. And again, I don't want to wet blanket any of that. I don't want to, if that makes the group better understand the content and feel better about whatever recommendation they're making, that's the macro goal, right? So all this other stuff of the problem areas are secondary to the macro goal of making sure this group feels good about the information that staff is preparing and that they understand it to the level that the budget committee role is, enabling them to carry out their recommendation that then has council finish that off. So I don't mean to belabor it and be anti. It's not anti, it's just seeing issues that I've seen before. But I don't want to let that stop because that doesn't automatically come into play.
Okay, so is there any other discussion before I call for a motion? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we request a digital copy in a usable format. And the data provided on the pages.
All right, and hold 1 second. Who's capturing this, by the way?
I had it.
The
Okay, good.
recording.
Okay, so that's Jeffrey, yes, and okay, so we have a motion to have those sent out.
A second it?
And a second from Angela, all right. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed
Okay,
and abstaining? If the motion passes. So we will have those sent out before the next meeting.
Tomorrow morning. Yep.
Okay, all right.
get a count on the
Vote. Well, you were the only nay.
whatever people, yeah.
Would you like to do a hand vote?
10-1.
You okay with that, or you want to do a hand vote? Okay.
Oh, 9-1. Excuse me, it's 9-1. Alan.
Okay, and so other than that then, so we'll get that information. Are there other questions about the general fund tonight or things that you need before the next meeting that are on your mind now to ask the question?
I have a quick question for you, Adam, and you're welcome to address this at the next meeting if that's more convenient, but if you can talk a little bit about the relationship between the unappropriated fund balances and the fund balance targets that we're going to be. And we can also save that for a finance audit committee meeting if that's more appropriate for that group.
Yeah, no, the idea that kind of the going methodology for that is each of the funds have different, excuse me, took a drink at the wrong time, have different cash flow, periods. So the general fund gets its cash in November, December with property tax. So they all have different needs. So the general fund has consistent payroll needs, right? Because it's majority payroll, less capital. So what is an operating target? 2.5 months, 3.5 months worth of revenue should be always on hand. So there's general cities have different policies depending upon what's happening, what business functions are happening in each particular fund. The way we were looking at it, for the fund balance targets for the enterprise funds, which are the water and wastewater, those have larger debts. So they also, some of the debt covenants drive the minimum fund balance. So you establish, and you might have to change those if you go into a big debt, like, you say the regular is 3 months of cash on hand should be the target of revenue. So you do a math and you say, okay, 3 months of that is water is almost about 2 million fund balance. So, so it's that's millions, get 300 or 500,000 on hand, or it should be your fund balance target, and you don't want to go below that. If you take out a big loan, you might want to revisit that and say, well, that fund balance policy, is influenced by a debt covenant. So you need to increase that. Now it needs to, because it requires you to have some different formula. Also S&P Global, we get rated on our bond stuff. So they want to see a fund balance target, and having a policy and adhering to it, gets us better scoring with S&P. So each fund really has the fund balance target should kind of match up with its business operations. And I have a spreadsheet ready for our next meeting to kind of look at most of the fund targets that I think we want to look at setting from our discussion. At least you guys didn't, it was more theory. You didn't have the numbers. So I have the spreadsheet with the numbers for finance audit. 2 of the 4 funds have met it for a long time, whatever we were contemplating. The other 2 weren't always meeting that. And I think that's a kind of a good thing. I think it shows that, but they're not far off. And actually this budget with the general fund gets it to that spot. And that's really what we talked about with the revenue options subcommittee. A big part of our problem was the recognition that we were unfortunately in a habit of not addressing the gap, we're addressing it. We're addressing it by taking it out of fund balance. And so not having a lower level that says we shall not go below. So that's the theory for fund balance targets, is it's really a directive to staff to say, you shall never go below. And if you see a trend, that is looking like that's going to happen, raise the red flag. It also helps with our rate modeling consultants. They will be a part of that when we do a master plan and we look at redoing a rate plan. That's a huge part. Usually a lot of cities will rely on the rate modeling that just it'll say, here's what you need to have on hand. And they usually take into account debt as well as capital. So it's kind of that ratio, and each fund is a little bit different, just like contingencies. This is a little more nuanced than contingencies. They're a little more block because they're kind of a just in case. They're a little localized financial insurance. Fund balances are a little more nuanced than that, but similar concept. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's consistent with my previous understanding. I was just wondering if there's any relationship between the unappropriated fund balance. I mean, we're looking at that on an annual basis here, though. So I'm guessing
the fund balances would be, the fund balance targets is to ensure a minimum unappropriated amount. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions tonight? Or is your brain full? I don't have to have a motion to close, but so last chance if you have any questions.
I move to adjourn 7:09.
All right, we're adjourned 7:50. Thank you all.